friends. My name's Bonnie Perry. I'm your bishop. It turns out that the election to call me to be your bishop was 2 days ago and 2 years ago, or I like to think of it as a year and a decade of COVID ago. And it's a weird world, but I am thoroughly enjoying inhabiting this weird world with all of you. So let's pray, and then we'll carry on. The Lord be with you. Thank you. Let us pray. O God of unchangeable power and eternal light, look favorably on your whole church, that wonderful and sacred mystery. By the effectual working of your providence, carry out in tranquility the plan of salvation. Let the whole world see and know that things which were cast down are being raised up, and things which have grown old are being made new, and that all things are being brought to their perfection by him, through whom all things were made, your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. All right, let me see. Let me just adjust my screen a second. There we go. All right, so first, I very much want to thank all of you for choosing to spend a portion of this beautiful evening dreaming about some of the leadership in the Episcopal Church. And with us on this call, we've got lay and ordained members of the Commission on Ministry, some folks from my staff, and all of you folks who are interested in the ordination process, may know someone who's interested perhaps in the ordination process, or may wonder, may just be wondering about how this sort of thing proceeds in your community of faith. So in any of those events, or for other ones I've failed to point out, thank you. Thank you for being here. And let me be really clear that the heart and soul of our faith communities are people who are not ordained. People who love God, love Jesus, and are filled with the Holy Spirit, and choose to be in relationship with God and have no desire to be ordained. That, I believe, are the hearts and the souls of our faith communities. But perhaps our lungs may be likened to the ordained leadership of the Episcopal Church, or perhaps our ordained leaders are the synapses, or maybe even the blood vessels of our ministry, or maybe I should just be done with the body metaphor. But tonight we're going to be talking about ordained leadership. And leadership in all forms matters. It mattered to Jesus when he chose his apostles and disciples, and it matters to all of us right now. I mean, think about it. Who were those 70 people that Jesus sent out 2 by 2? I mean, and what attributes was he looking for? I mean, we don't really know. I mean, what we do know is that between those 70, the original 12 minus 1 plus 1, plus the women at the tomb and the Apostle Paul, well, because of all of them, we're here now. And what we do know is that the need then was great, and that they were effective in changing people's lives and altering the landscape and transforming the world's view. And we're at a time and a place again when the need of our world is great. And I believe that we are some of the very ones whom God is calling again to alter the landscape and transform our world. And part of the way that we do this is by reimagining, redefining, and refining the manner in which we call forth, identify, and form new ordained leaders for our existing and are yet to be created communities of faith. So what you're going to hear and see about this evening is a portion of that reformation that we're engaged in here in the Diocese of Michigan. Our churches, our diocese has changed more in the last 15 months than it has in the last 15 years. And these changes, exacerbated by the pandemics, will not subside. The Episcopal Church in America, and specifically the communities of faith in the Episcopal Diocese of Michigan, must continue on this pathway of change, or we will die. And we're looking for people who are leaders filled with a passion for the words and ministry and the actions of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Filled with the passion for the words, the ministry, and the actions of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're looking for people who understand that their primary responsibility as a leader of a community of faith will be embodying the gospel in the world outside our church doors and seeking and forming other leaders to embody this gospel. We're seeking people who are comfortable helping other people grow, people who are alive in our world as it is, and people who understand that much of their lives will not be about being guardians of tradition, but rather enactors of God's kingdom. And it's a tall order, but I think it is so very, very compelling. And I'm delighted that you've come to spend some time to hear about this process and this journey. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues now to outline our process, talk about the competencies, and then to hear your thoughts and your reactions, and hopefully to answer some of your questions. Let's see. Andrea, are you up next, friend?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you, Bishop. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a few slides to kind of go along with what I'm going to talk about with the competencies. And you have just heard from Bishop Bonnie, but I wanted to start the presentation off with a quotation as well. This really summarizes the things that the bishop just said. And I think that it's really important to think about the competencies in light of those needs and those qualities that we are seeking, because it's so urgent that we find ways to adapt, to change, and to be part of the world outside the church doors. So this is the context for our competencies. So the 4 competencies are laid out here. And just a quick kind of history of, we came to these by looking at what other dioceses were doing when they were working on their ordination processes. And we found some things that were inspiring to us. So we borrowed and we worked together, and we really discerned what were the things that were most important to us in our context here in the Diocese of Michigan. And so we came up with these 4 competencies: compelling faith, self-awareness and openness to growth, vocational awareness and community affirmation, and leadership and context. And I'll go over each of those really quickly. But before that, I'm going to say, why competencies? Why didn't we do this a different way? Well, one of the big things is that we understand that we are all different. We are all wonderfully and fearfully made in the image of God, but we're all made differently. And so by having these rich competencies, we're able to honor that. We can recognize that individuals might be strong in certain areas, but need support in others. As we go over these competencies, you might say, oh my gosh, that's a lot. And it is a lot. These are developmental. They're a framework for lifelong growth, not boxes to check at one point in time. And that's one of the things that really impressed us about the competency-based approach, is that it is developmental. And finally, It increases transparency by giving us a common language and set of expectations. Sometimes I think there can be a perception that it's just sort of a know it when you see it kind of thing. This person has it, this person doesn't. And I don't think that's ever been true, but the competencies give us a way of talking about things using a common set of language and getting at some of the common expectations that we share. So with that being said, I'll say very quickly that you can find these competencies in written form on the EDOMI website. You can go to ministries and departments, and under that, there's a column for ministry development. And then you can click on Commission on Ministry. So the part here that says characteristics, we're not going to go over that. That's why it's in small print. I don't expect you to read it. But what it does, what I think it does is it gives us a sense of how rich these are, because each particular competency has a definition that has between 1 and 3 parts. But underneath that, there's all this richness, which you can read for yourself. And I'm going to, as I go along, maybe call out 1 or 2 things in each particular competency area. So compelling faith. And Bishop Bonnie mentioned this when she was talking at the beginning, having a compelling spiritual life and passion for the gospel, and also the ability to communicate the gospel in ways that communities find engaging and relevant. So not just being a spiritual person, but being able to connect and share. And so you can see that some of the things under this are really being able to translate the gospel, proclaim the word in a way that it draws people to God and helps to affect change in the world. Self-awareness and openness to growth really looks for spiritual maturity, self-awareness, and authenticity. These are the key things. Underneath that, you can see that there are a lot of different things. People who are kind, relational, resilient, thoughtful, reflective, but also, and I think near the end, it's important to look at people who are aware of their social location and the ways that racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and other collective and structural sins have shaped all of our worldviews. So this is not just some kind of like feel-good, touchy-feely competency. There are some real things that we think are important here. Vocational awareness and community affirmation looks for clarity about the nature of ministry and the order of ministry to which someone is called, both the individual and the community, and willingness to be and ability to be vocationally flexible. Now, I want to be clear here that we are not, in saying this, willingness and ability to be vocationally flexible. We're not saying that we think that there is one particular model of ministry that's going to work. We know these competencies are for deacons who are non-stipendiary. They will be for some priests who have part-time calls, some priests like me who are bivocational, some who have full-time calls. But what we want is we want people to be aware of the context in which ministry takes place and that it is changing. And we want to have people think about how the pieces of their lives fit together and how all employment can be ministry. And our final competency is leadership and context. And this one has 3 parts because it's big, it's important. And it includes, as Bishop Bonnie was kind of hitting on at the beginning, the ability to lead, organize, and equip others to bring other people along in their own ministry. Because of course, through our baptismal covenant, we know that we are all called to ministry. And part of this role is to help people recognize in themselves what they're called for and equip them. Innovative leadership. I mean, the last 15 months have been a crash course in the need to be innovative. I think we have all recognized that, and that's not going to stop. And similarly, the ability to lead congregations through change, because change is one of the only constants that we have in our world today. So all of these things, these 4 competencies, as I said, you're probably thinking that's a lot. How could anybody have all of those things fully embodied? And they probably can't. They're developmental. There are levels of competency in each one. And so the way that we'll use these things are for personal reflection, growth, and lifelong learning. I hope that every single person in the diocese, lay or ordained, thinks about these competencies and what they mean in their own life. And I hope that all ordained folk use them to shape their continuing education. They're also for congregational discernment, both formal, the Congregational Discernment Committee, and also for informal discernment within congregations. They're for postulancy and candidacy interviews. And we have used them in some of those contexts now and have seen how powerful they are in shaping the questions and getting everybody on the same page with similar expectations as we go into those. And finally, they're for designing educational opportunities so that people can really learn and grow in these areas. So as a diocese, we'll be shaping our educational options and opportunities around some of these competency areas as well. So that's a super quick tour of the competencies. And I don't know if you want to have questions now, Susie and Bishop, or if you want to go on with the rest of the process and take questions.
What do you think, Susie?
Just take a quick breather for questions if we need to. But yeah, most of our time together today will be questions. And so if you have questions like, I don't know what that word was that was just on the screen, that's coming up.
But this is essentially for all of you. So have at it, friends.
Yeah, Gabrielle, is that a hand? I think you have to unmute yourself though to talk. You guys are also welcome to use the chat for questions in case you happen to be somewhere loud or hard to unmute.
Mm-hmm.
I'll keep that open.
Right.
Anna, also put
now I'm live. Hi, guys. So is the term social location, does that mean economic status?
Yeah, it does mean that. And it also means things like your gender, your race, your sexual orientation, and things of that nature as well. So it's kind of an umbrella term. But it's a great question because it is one of those buzzwords.
Mm-hmm. It's a new one for me, and I'm 43. I'm one of these. Okay.
What else?
Shift out of the.
And just because we're pinned to the start menu, it's kind of hard to see if people are raising their hands like this. So if you do want to just unmute and jump in or use the raise hand little icon under reactions, that'd probably be easier.
I can also unpin you, whatever you prefer.
And you can just hit the gallery view, Andrea, and you can be unpinned.
Yeah. We have enough interest that not everyone fits on my gallery.
Right, on one screen. Right, me too.
Great.
Andrea, this is Emery Dumas from the Cathedral. I have a question regarding leadership and context. I think it was the fourth competency. Leads, organize, and equips others in their own ministry. I feel like that would be a huge task, obviously, and also a barrier for candidates because I think that's a skill that you would need. So does the Commission on Ministry, when they identify that or when the candidate identifies that may be a lower competency for themselves, does the Commission on Ministry assist or help or educate or train to become better, more competent in that area? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of a multi-layered sort of response, because first, I think that we are hoping that people who are considering going into the ordination process do have some opportunities for leading in their congregations, which would include bringing other people along into ministry with them. But we understand that every context is going to be different. And so, yes, we do have our formation plans are going to be based around these competency areas as well. And people will have opportunities throughout their time in the process to grow in those areas. But I think we do look for an orientation toward leadership that is not just like top down, but is empowering of other people, and some evidence of that from the very beginning. Bishop, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the kind of thing, Emery, when you're doing something and you're turning to other people and saying, "Hey, do you want to do this with me?"
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think frequently it's as simple.
You make it sound so simple, Bishop.
I think
that's exactly.
I think it can be. I do think it can be that when we are passionate about something, frequently then we enjoy sharing that joy with other people. And I think there are lots of different ways of doing that. So yeah, I hope that's a little bit enlightening for you, Emery.
It is. Thank you both.
I think it's helpful to the competencies. It's been a real shift for me in my thinking because I'm a list maker. But really leaning into the idea that these are a developmental continuum. Andrea had said, like, it's not a checklist of skills that you acquire one time. People who are good at bringing other people into leadership also can stand to work on that most of the time. Like, these are all things that we can all learn more about and all get better at. And we're looking for capacity, or Andrea, I think you said orientation to this.
And does that give you joy? Does the notion of kind of getting other, like, come on, you guys? I mean, does that feel like, that doesn't feel like that much fun, right? So, okay, right? Or, oh my goodness, that was fun. Now, that doesn't mean, I'd invite us to not get confused and thinking, well, I'm not extroverted, I'm not bubbly. It's not that. It literally is, hey, what about? Now, and you may get your energy from being with that crowd you've gathered, or you may get your energy when you get the heck away from them. But the point is, are you able to say and to get folks to think about, what about this?
It almost feels to me like the new competencies versus, a checklist allows the Spirit to move within us a lot more than just checking something off. And I truly believe if it's a calling, that the Spirit will guide you, even when you're afraid or hesitant to move forward. The Spirit will kind of guide you in the direction that you need to. So it almost seems to me the competencies embrace more of a spiritual walk as opposed to a linear walk with, let's check this off, let's check that off. And I like that idea, to be quite honest.
I think that I love these competencies. I love the way that they were described and distilled. And I completely agree with the proposition that these are not once and done, but that they are developmental. I guess my question, though, in terms of process is, how do you, as the commission or the bishop, discern whether someone is far enough along in the process that it's ripe for ordination, or they're not ready yet, or they'll never be ready? Since it's not you're done, you're always going to be in the middle of a process in it. How do you know when it's good enough, ready enough?
That's probably a great segue to sort of the nitty-gritty pieces of the practical process. Thanks, Joe. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. some of this is going to be a repeat of some of what Andreas just said for us. But I do want to talk about some of the highlights, some other maybe philosophical highlights, as well as practical ones for some of what we've been talking about. The discernment process is a community process. In the Episcopal Church, we believe that calls happen among a community of faith, that it's not about someone's private relationship with God. And so all along the way, through the ordination process, there are various groups of people who meet and discuss and pray and question and wonder about the ministry God is calling any particular person to. And we also know that God calls everyone to ministry. Some of those people will be called to ordained ministry. Some are called to ministry as nurses, as parents, as teachers, as accountants, as construction workers, all the various ways that we spend our time. So the source of this discernment happens in your own community of faith. And there is a lot of involvement at the beginning of the process, emphasizing the sponsoring clergy person as the advocate and the guide for the early parts of discernment, an advisor who is helping you sort out whatever comes next. Related to that piece, the process for getting into further stages is front-loaded now. There's a lot of work that happens early on in this discernment process. A little heavier than it's been in the past, if you happen to be familiar with previous versions of this process. One of the primary ways that people in our diocese have experienced the practice of discernment is through the Whitaker program called Exploring Your Spiritual Journey. Now, that's not a discernment practice just for people who think they might be called to the priesthood or to the diaconate. That's a discernment process for anyone and everyone who's interested in figuring out what God is poking them with. And so that program will still be normative in this process, but it's not going to be strictly mandatory as it's been in the past. However, it is expected that anyone who's entering a formal discernment process for ordination will have demonstrated some form of leadership in their congregation and community of faith. I know Andrea did a lot of worship leadership at the church that she was sponsored out of. And as the vicar of that church currently, I'm still bearing the fruits of her work. In my congregation, I was on the vestry, I taught church school, I helped to run our Advent programming, all those kinds of things that can be done that give us, Emery, to your point, opportunities to bring people along in ministry, even if you're maybe not in charge of a whole lot of stuff. The other piece I want to highlight, and I know I saw Sister V on this call, but now I can't see all of you anymore. But we have, once you've moved from the formal discernment process in your sponsoring congregation and into the formal discernment process with the Commission on Ministry, we have chaplains for the process now. Sister Veronica is on this call, and you may know her also as the interim Whitaker director, and also the Reverend Ron Spann, who's a retired priest of our diocese and a longtime spiritual director. So I do want to hit a couple terms that we've been throwing around, just in case you're not familiar with them. So we've talked about community discernment committees, and this is a piece of the early process. When someone begins formal discernment, this is what is happening. A group of people are gathered together to use a formal process we've developed that's on that website that Anna put in the chat. You can read the whole program, to pray and discuss and wonder and talk about how God is working in their lives and how the competencies that Andrea shared might be manifest in that person's skills and gifts and joys. I did want to talk for a minute because this gets abbreviated a lot. The Commission on Ministry often gets referred to simply as the COM. And that is a group of, in our diocese, 20 people, both lay and ordained, who lead this process, shape this process, and oversee and work with people in the ordination process. And then there's 4 words that we're going to throw around that are just various stages of the formal ordination process. In the early stages, this gets named a bunch of different things, which is why there's slashes. You're an aspirant or an inquirer, you're discerning, you are a discerner. When this becomes more formalized, when you've had a community discernment committee and this group and you have come together and prayed and decided that, yes, all of you together think there may be a call to ordained ministry, then some paperwork happens and goes to the bishop's office, and you'll meet with the bishop and then become a nominee. Further along the line, people become a postulant. That's another milestone, mile marker in the process. And then candidacy, or being a candidate, is another marker in the process prior to ordination. So if you've never heard those words before, that's what they are. And if you can't sleep, you can find them in the canons of the Episcopal Church and read all about it. So I want to share a bit of a flow chart with you. And if any of you really like flow charts, you'll notice that this one is a little crazy making because the arrows go in every single direction. But I happen to love flow charts. And this is what that early aspirant, inquirer, discerner stage really looks like. Somebody is poked through the voice of God or through the voice of a loving friend about the idea of ordination. The Holy Spirit has this habit of sounding like people who know us well. So maybe that's what happens. Maybe clergy who are on this call see leaders in their congregations and say, hey, you know, have you thought about this? You might be called to this leadership ministry. However that call comes, an individual then sits down and talks with a clergy person about that call and what they're feeling. And if they concur in those two gathered together with this discernment, there's a bunch of steps that could happen. If you are someone who needs a lot of support in exploring and discerning exactly what the shape of God's action in your life has looked like, it might be time to do exploring your spiritual journey. If you are interested in leadership but haven't had a lot of chances to do that, and maybe something shifted in your life to open that up, that would be the place to start. Maybe you've done both of those things and you and the clergy person gather together and say, you know what, yep, it's time to just start formal discernment. And a committee will be formed. That process takes a little while. There's several meetings, and the process for that committee is formed around those competencies. So Joe, some of your questions about how do we assess these competencies, you can see some examples of that in the community discernment committee process that's on the website to sort of see where we start with that. So at many of these stages, one possibility, of course, is that our discerner and their community might say, you know what, actually, no, this is not what God has in mind for me. And whenever we get to a point in the process where that is true, then the support team sponsoring clergy, discernment committees, our chaplains, if you're a little further along in the process, are there to help you figure out what God is calling you to. Because even if it's not the priesthood or the diaconate, God poked you. God called you to something. And there'll be ways to figure that out. But if those gathered communities say, actually, we think this might be the diaconate, then this is what happens. There's a whole packet of papers that get submitted to the bishop's office, and that's on the website. It's the report from the committee and a letter of recommendation from the sponsoring clergy, things like that. And then our discerner and their sponsoring clergy person will have a meeting with the bishop. And again, going with the hypothetical that all of this goes well and everyone continues to agree that there is a call to explore towards ordination, then you'd be invited to Apostilancy Weekend. And there's a whole bunch of canonically required background checks and evaluations that happen in there too. And then Apostilancy Weekend, similar to the Community Discernment Committee, is another group of people who are spending time with an individual story and with these competencies and finding out how those match up and whether there's a sense of call in the way that those overlap. I'm going to go ahead and stop there sharing that. I do want to share real quick our Commission on Ministry website. So you can find this. One of the pieces that's important to us in the ordination process, because of what Andrea talked about, that God calls all kinds of people from all kinds of situations for ministries we maybe haven't even thought of yet. We want the ordination process to be transparent and flexible so that it can be fair and consistent. That's kind of a tall order, but it's what we're going for. So all of this material can be found on this website. The slide, there's more detailed slides about what's in all those packets and things, if you want to find that here. Full documents about the competencies, and then what's in these initial packets for applying as well. And that whole Community Discernment Committee process.
It's an inordinate amount of material, friends. I'm so excited that we managed to have all of this. I've not ever seen this much material on a process, on a website saying, here it is, right? It's all going to be unique for each person, but here's the process. Here are the questions. Here's what you're going to get to do. And it's all there. If you are avoiding something else in your life, there is so much that you can read on that website. It's amazing how much you could procrastinate about other things with what's on that website. And reading it, friends, it's lovely. The questions and the thoughtfulness, the spirituality and theology that's present there, it's really quite something. It's not just, or even at all, bureaucratic paperwork. It is really gospel driven. I'm so excited about the good work that folks have done.
It's your time now, friends. You can use the chat for questions. You can use the little hand raising button if you know how, or just unmute yourself. If you would say who you are when you unmute, that would be helpful because we can't, well, I'll speak for myself. I can't always find you that fast. What are y'all wondering about?
This is Cindy Corner from St. Michael's and All Angels Episcopal Church. We're a total ministry church. How would this affect, or how would this work for a group that is going through together?
Where did Ellen go?
Hi, Cindy. Hi, I'm Ellen Ekavog. I'm the canon for Congregational Development and Transition Ministry. So I imagine for total ministry, I would like us, and we can talk about this some more because this isn't fully formed yet, but you know, these competencies, I think, are not just, they're for like every faithful Christian, I think. And so using them to sort of develop the team and thinking about where the team is strong and everybody in their individual discernment. So some of these resources would be useful. However, and maybe Bishop, you might want to speak to this about sort of, I think those who were going to get ordained on the team, of course, would have to still go through the process, but we would be forming it more as a team rather than just individuals going through. Does that make sense, Cindy? As we're leaning into this new process?
Yeah, I think the competencies are very rich and needed for any kind of congregation. I was just wondering, what happens if A is ready before B and C and D?
I think there's flexibility in the system built in, and adaptability and agility. And so I think we're going to have to live into it. And so it will, I think it's built for that, but we're going to live into it and then get feedback and see.
I think it makes sense that it can be used for a team. The competencies definitely could be used for a team. Just the fine tuning of how it might work. Thank you.
Right. And exactly.
Yeah, Cindy, and you know what? Here's the beautiful thing. We're building the plane. We're flying the plane. We're not going to fly that far above the ground so it doesn't hurt so much, right? But yeah, but I think this idea of transparent for everyone, and this notion that it's also going to be applied to specific contexts. So, yeah. And we'll keep learning. It's the developmental part, right? We'll keep learning too.
Steve asked a good question in the chat about people who are interested in serving, people who are not interested in serving in congregational parish ministry and are looking to pursue ordained ministry in non-traditional settings. Yeah, it's the short answer. Absolutely there in the competencies. I mean, that's not a blanket statement, of course, saying that we're going to ordain everybody who has a creative idea. But yes,
like
the answer to your question is yes.
Like jail or prison, like ministry?
Prison. Yeah.
Oh.
Yep.
Hi, this is Erica Benson from St. James Grosse Ile. And I have seen the information that's been updated on the website and the nominee stuff that was, I think, just updated today. I've been hounding the website looking for things. And I wanted to say that I agree with the bishop. The language is so it's very welcoming. It's very inviting. I feel like there's a lot of places to go with that. And as being in the process, it's good. Lack of better words, it's good. So thank you. I do have a question. I have completed my CDC, but we began the process before everything has rolled out. So we are one of those groups that were in process while things were transitioning. So what does that look like for someone like me? Who has a CDC report, but does not necessarily follows the older guidelines.
Yep. Yeah, and fair enough for that, Erica. We said that we weren't going to stop the process, right? And knowing that we would have some sort of discrepancies with that. What I'm going to need, a fulsome, robust letter from your rector, from Phil, for his support of you. And that letter is on there, right? I'm going to need the essays that are on there. It would be helpful if your CDC group looked at the competencies, said, hey, here's the report we wrote. But if we had seen this, we would say this about this person. And then perhaps sort of wisely highlighting some of the competencies, right? I'm not asking you to do it all over again, but really look at the material. I think it's kind of, wise as serpent, innocent as doves. I think it's super helpful to know this is what we have in mind. You did it differently. fine, we know you did it differently, and be thinking about how you would frame your materials, your leadership, your call in that framework. Does that make sense?
Definitely. And we, at the very tail end, we saw the competencies. So there was discussion within the CDC. I was tracking pretty closely on what you had. So thank you. I appreciate that. I just, you know, it's a gray area, and I know you want to bring transparency to it. So it's helpful. Thank you.
How fun that you were stalking the website.
Yes.
This is Carolyn Johnson from Nativity.
Hey,
would like to ask a question. How do these competencies maybe change the process? You know, the classes that we might have had before. How would you bring all of this in, or would you change anything?
Who wants that one?
Carolyn, let me make sure I'm understanding your question, because I think it relates to something I'm hearing in the chat too, which is basically, what's the educational and formational process for being ordained?
Yes.
Oh, and Katrina's is specifically about prerequisites. Okay, Katrina, if we don't answer you, we'll come back to that one then. So it turns out that we don't have total control over the seminaries and their curriculum. And I think that what we're doing in the competencies lines up well with traditional seminary formation for people who are going that route. We also have been doing a variety of local formation. And if Sister V's still here, she may want to pop in and talk about some of this too. We've been doing local formation of deacons for, well, a very long time. And we have, you may have seen a new program launching now with a lot of scholarship money behind it, that is educational formation for ministry through EDS, Episcopal Divinity School, at Union Theological Seminary, that it focuses particularly on social justice in the Anglican tradition, and gets into a lot of what these competencies are looking at. So those are some ways that the competencies overlap. The other piece that I think doesn't change at all, Carolyn, from how formation has happened, but is where a lot of this gets worked out, is in what we call field ed. Field ed is an internship placement, basically, for people who aren't from fields that use that. We are asking people to do 2 years of field ed in the ordination process. And that's where a lot of the rubber sort of hits the road on putting shape on these competencies and how they look. Andrea, you actually educate people for a living.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you've really covered most things, but one thing that we did do, and I think that it's helpful to know, is we looked at the canonical requirements for both priests and deacons. And so these competencies do map onto those things. And I'm certain that whatever the seminaries are teaching aligns with those as well. And so, so different seminaries have different areas of focus, of course, but they, I'm sure, are covering things that are included in our competencies. As far as deacon formation, as you know, Carolyn, that's something that is, that has been handled locally. And I think there will be some adjustments to that as time goes on. And again, I think that's something that we do have a little more control over, and we'll be able to shape with these competencies in mind, as well as other things like the diocesan goals and things like that. And so, I think it's a blended answer, kind of as Susie was saying, is that we definitely are aware that there are many things that come into someone's education and formation. And the ones we have control over, we can and will mold somewhat, and the other ones we will, work with the people to help understand how they flow into these competency areas. So, yeah.
Gabrielle?
I also,
in what ways are the deacon formation pathways changing specifically?
I'm not sure that they are changing. I get, so say a little bit more, Gabrielle, about your question.
No, it's just Andrea said that the formational pathways for the decanate were evolving.
So yeah, so what we're reworking local formation and diaconal formation. So a part of that you're going to see is the justice and race in the Anglican tradition at the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary. So that's the first piece, and that's a piece that we're going to invite anyone who is interested in this process, like jump on that now, because that is going to be the center of what we're doing. In terms of our formation program, we're going to make justice, issues of justice, not something that we graft onto a program, like an extra thing, justice and race, but the center of what we're doing, and wrap everything else around it. And so that part is it, we're evolving with that, and then really looking at the roots of the Whitaker School and how we can really embrace that, invigorate that, and begin to form recreate what that local formation looks like. So that's part of the airplane that is getting the wings. So it's not off the ground yet, but the EDS, UTS gets you a ramp. Cindy?
Just a suggestion that in future educational offerings from the diocese, that somewhere there might be labeled which competency it might be addressing. So if we know that we have some growth that we would like to an area we like to grow in, we might be able to find the ones that might be more appropriate for us to be part of.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love that idea.
Yeah, you may notice that the newsletter, if you're reading, hope maybe you're stalking the newsletter as well as the website. The newsletter is now, all the things are labeled with looking at the various parts of the diocesan vision and mission. So everything that's happening in the diocese is now sort of labeled with one of those areas as well. We could be really color coded. So, and you guys might want to watch some more Netflix too. I mean, I like you stalking the website and the newsletter, but there's also Netflix and books. Books are good.
So I've got a question. Yep. So I signed up to the course for the course at EDS UTS. It looked good, so I actually did some background reading over the weekend to decide whether I wanted to do it, and I'm signed up. And it's fine, independent of this. It's just, it looks like a good place to be. But my question basically is, so I get the social justice as a focus, and I'm all in. What else are you looking for in terms of areas that you're particularly interested in? Not in terms of deacon versus priest or lay minister, but generally, what do you actually need in the diocese in terms of depth and direction, right?
I think David and Andrea or Susan chime in. I think that's where the competencies come in. I mean, I think we're really looking for flexible leaders who know how to communicate the gospel in a manner that is going to be compelling for people.
Okay.
That's, I mean, boom. Entrepreneurial is good too. And it's not bad to figure out to be fairly adept at social media. I mean, but I think, I think those are all of the pieces, and you can get that formation at a variety of different places. And I think each one has upsides and downsides. Somebody said something about, the ability to control seminaries. Yeah, mostly we don't. However, I have to say, we're the ones who got EDS at UTS to create that class. They have 38 people registered for it right now, friends. So if you want into this class, please do it now, because now I'm going to have to fight to make sure I get my Michigan people in. And we created this, and it turns out there's across the country, people are interested in this, which actually gives me some hope. But that part's kind of fun. And who knew we could make a moneymaker for them? So,
Regine has her hand up.
Yes, hi, thank you so much, Susie. Good evening, everyone. My name is Regine Head, and I am representing the amazing Church of the Messiah under the direction of Pastor Barry. First, I'd like to say Bishop Perry, Andrea, and Susie, you all did a phenomenal job with this presentation. I learned so much information, and I have a ton of notes that I can't wait to go over. From the dialogue and the further discussion on competencies, I couldn't help but come to the question of leadership and the difference of leadership that this revised plan will bring about. And either one of you could answer this, but I'm wondering if you think that this will bring about more leadership in the church, and even more leadership with a diverse role, from hearing with more of our young people and hearing younger voices in this process, because it seems like much of what we mentioned, just the innovation and non-traditional and really being able to connect with others, especially in your community, it literally sounds like those who are directly involved and aware of what's happening on a daily basis. And some of our younger people are out here, and they're movers and they're shakers, and they're spreading the gospel. And I'm wondering if there's just any pieces of information that you could give that I could take back and share with those others, younger people who may be inspired to follow their calling.
Well then.
Reggie, that's a great question, and I love it. One of the things, so I started the ordination process fairly young myself, not long out of college for me. And one of the things that I am really valuing about some of the work we're doing here is the flexibility that we're building into this process. And so looking at ways that someone who is very young without maybe a lot of work experience, but a lot of church experience, or somebody who has retired and has discovered that change in their life is opening up a whole new possibility of ministry, that from any spectrum there's an ability to engage this work right where you are. I think you're picking up on exactly the right points in what we're trying to do.
And I just want to add, thank you for saying that, because I feel like if this is resonating with you and resonating in a way that you think will resonate with other younger people, that is amazing, because we really work to try to create something, as Susie said, that was flexible and that was friendly to people at different points in their lives, whether people are, retirees, whether they're younger folks, whether they're middle-aged, that anyone is welcome in the process. And the kind of things that you were mentioning that people bring, the passion, the being out in the world, is exactly the kind of thing that we're excited about. So I guess, something to take back is just, yes, welcome. I'm very excited.
Yeah. I too was ordained young. I only had a year in between college and seminary. And when I was ordained, I was 15 years younger than everybody else, because that was a time in the church when they were sending people my age away and telling them to go get experience. Now, to be fair, now as someone who's not young, you know, I know more than I did then. And I'm super glad that I got ordained when I was 27 years old. I had so much to learn, and those first premarital counseling sessions were super awkward, but because everybody was older than me. But you know what, it was actually the older couple, the 60-year-old and the 45-year-old, that forgot their wedding license. So after that happened, I was like, age doesn't matter. So Carol, you got a question?
My question is, I'm hearing about social justice and all this, but my question, being a therapist, is where does mental health play in all of this? I have realized in the past, since I retired, that mental health, especially with the spiritual bit to it, is important for people, not only the people in formation, but the people that we serve. And where does mental health play in the process? And where does mental health play, where does it play out in how we serve the people in the diocese?
One of the requirements to be in the ordination process now is that you'll be in therapy. You'll have a therapist, and you'll have a spiritual director. I like to think that having a therapist, I usually write on my intake sheet, I'm a parish priest, or now I'll say I'm a diocesan bishop. It's a chronic issue. I think it is just a lifelong process, at least for me. Susie, Andrea, super important, Carol. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to just say that, you know, the competency that deals with self-awareness and openness to growth really speaks to some of those issues, because we do want people who are aware of, you know, how to include self-care and boundaries, and how to build resilience in their own lives as well as in community. And so I think that, you know, if in addition to the requirement to be in therapy as part of the process, that competency in particular, we really did talk about mental health as we put that one together, even though those specific words don't occur in it.
Is she talking? I'm sorry. I'm Brianne. Hi, Carol. You and I spoke on the phone once about ecumenical ministry. Is she more so asking the question, though, of how to, once you go through the process and you're a priest and you're a leader or a leader in your congregation, how to educate the congregation about mental health, and how to preach, and how to sort of be a mental health guide? Is that more like what you were asking? I don't know. That's what I was hearing.
Yeah, I was talking about people in the process, but more about how do we get across. And that's one of the things, because I work for Better Help, and one of the things that I have discovered is people are very much hungering for mental health services that teach the gospel, that help them recover as we're teaching the gospel, as refer to the gospel. I have a lot of clients who are fundamentalist Christians who have a very warped opinion about religion, and some of them have been really messed up by these churches, and some just hunger to hear the gospel helping them through their mental health issues. And so I was just wondering where that plays out also in our parishes, in our communities.
it's a very clear and present issue. I think talking about it, preaching about it, I think being very open and clear about the importance of it in our own lives as leaders is super, super important. And I think it can be a part of people's ministry. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Is that getting at what you guys were trying to get at?
Yeah, it was. It was. Thank you.
Jenny?
Thank you. I also have a question regarding mental health. Is there sort of an opportunity for people who are in the process or just going into the process to be in contact with each other and support each other through, because we're going to understand what we're going through better than literally anybody else, because we're going through it with this new procedure and we're the first guinea pigs.
Mm-hmm. You know what? This is where I would, I'm happy to encourage people to be connected with each other, to create those groups. And we can give you names and numbers, but if you're creating those groups, then you're showing efficacy and leadership and agency, all of which is what I'm looking for. So we're not going to create that group, because we'll have the cohort of the people who are postulants and onwards. That group will exist, but the folks before that, I'm sure we can figure out, Jenny, I think it's fabulous. I'm sure we can figure out ways to share that information. People are doing it now in the chat, and I'm sure Anna will capture Anna Stania on my staff will capture that chat, and you can get those numbers. So friends, if you're interested in being connected with Jenny and other people, put your names and numbers into the chat and then contact Anna, and Anna will give you the names and numbers. And then I would invite you all, create your group. I'd love to hear about it, because that's going to say something to me.
Further along in the process, too, one of the pieces that the new chaplain role will take on and has already done is having retreats and occasional conversations for folks who are in the process. Not to create more things for people to have to travel to or to fill their time while they're doing all this other stuff, because chunks of this process are very intense, and particularly time-wise. But in January, the folks who are people who are postulants and candidates already had a retreat with the chaplains and maybe with the bishop. I wasn't part of that as the COM chair, because it was intentionally not including the people who make those decisions and run the process.
Yeah, I was there for a little bit and then let people be. And I think between Ron and Sister V will sort out when I'm present and when I'm not, because I'm very aware that I want people to just be able to be, and that can't always happen with me in the room. But yeah. This is great. I'm loving that you guys are creating this. Love it. One of the questions, I thought Cindy Corner had a great question. She put it in the chat about therapy and spiritual direction. Is that going to be prohibitive cost-wise for people? That's something we can take into consideration, Cindy. Right? I don't want that to get in the way of someone being able to do things, right? So I think that's something, I love that you raised that. And that's something that I think we can take into consideration and potentially offer assistance with, right? But thank you for putting that out there. Super, super helpful. Some of this is going to cost money, friends. We're wrestling with what that is going to be and what's acceptable and what's not, right? And so we're really trying to weigh that. Yeah.
Well, maybe while people are filling in contact information for people who want to connect from this call, I'm scrolling back. I think we got the questions from the chat. And let's see.
Excuse me, Susie. I wondered about Katrina's question about the educational prerequisites for becoming ordained. I thought, we might touch on that a little bit. So.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I did that a little bit by private message to see if we were answering something even close. Okay. So Katrina, if you don't mind me speaking for you, jump in if I'm doing it wrong. So it is true that to get a formal Master's of Divinity, because it's an accredited program, you have to have a college degree to do that. It is not across the board true that you need to have a college degree to be ordained. And that's a bit of what the flexibility is being built into this process. But to get a Master's of Divinity, it is true that you need to first hold an undergraduate degree.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
There's always that most of the time, or that asterisk there.
Yeah.
So for me, I was just super interested in attending and seeing what would open up and what changes you guys had made. And I wasn't sure if it was going to touch on anything like that. Because for me, I've been approached by several different pastors that I've had, and they all were like, we should start discernment. We should start discernment. And I'm always like, well, I don't have a degree. So then I kind of put myself backwards, and I'm like, my husband's pushing me hey, I really think you need to listen to the call. You're not being poked anymore. You're being shaken. and for me, I just kind of stopped there. I'm like, okay, well, I have to go through the whole process of getting an associate's degree before I can even start to do what I want to do, which is doing ministry, because I was a youth minister for 7 years. So my husband and I built this youth ministry, from just a couple of kids to over 30 kids. And it was really successful and wonderful. So I have experience, but yeah, I kind of get stuck on that. And I wasn't sure if anyone else, didn't have the formal education as well.
So I do know of people who have Masters of Divinity who do not have undergraduate degrees. And they're ordained. I do know that. To do local formation in the Diocese of Michigan going forward, it is quite possible, and I think it's going to be that way, that that you can do that process without a formal college degree. You're going to have to, the person who is successful at this is going to have to show good communication skills. I'm going to say very good to excellent communication skills. That may or may not come with a college degree. I also understand that. I've seen folks with college degrees that perhaps are lacking in that area. So you're going to have that. But to be ordained in the Diocese of Michigan, you're not necessarily going to need a Master's of Divinity. You are, however, going to need to pass the general ordination exams. But I'm committed to that, to there being ways for people to do that who haven't had the opportunity to do a 4-year college degree. I am not open to having second class or different standards, if that makes sense. I think there are lots of different ways for people to get on this river, and some can come from small creeks and some can come from melting glaciers. And I'll stop with the metaphors because we really don't want the glaciers to melt. That's really a problem. And then I get all wound up with polar bears. Yeah, and Elaine Bells is telling about that Ecumenical Theological Seminary has a way to do that as well. So did that help? Okay, thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, and again, a lot of this is being put in place. But if you want to know what a general ordination exam looks like, well, you can Google that and find that as well. And then have an idea, oh, this is what I'm going to have to do in terms of the written portion, right? This is the knowledge I'm going to have to demonstrate. And again, we don't stop there. I'm always hoping that we're continually learning. So, and I know that there are people who are priests who are signing up for the EDS class at Union. People who are pretty darn excited about that. So, yeah. What else, friends? I don't want to keep us forever, but I'm loving this robust conversation. Brianne?
I'm sorry. Maybe this is out there, but I'm just wondering, because you kind of covered this, if there's a very cost-effective way of going about this. You know, I've looked at scholarships, I've looked at grants, I've looked at all sorts of stuff, and you know, I just don't want to make a huge footstep when I'm trying to just do something that I feel like I'm called to do. I don't want to upset my whole family. So, you know, financially. And so, so that's something I'm personally wrestling with. So I'm just wondering if there's suggestions, or I know that there's scholarships available, but is there a different route that's not very, you know, won't upset everything?
You know, Church Divinity School Pacific, CDSP, much of their MDiv tuition now, if you get in, is free. There's huge scholarships at the Church Divinity School Pacific because Trinity Wall Street is underwriting it. Virginia Theological Seminary also has a great deal of scholarship money where you can almost go tuition free. So there are options now. That requires moving for each of those places. One's in Berkeley, the other one's in Alexandria, Virginia. Seabury Western, or Bexley Seabury, they keep changing their name. Seabury, I'm just calling them Seabury. Seabury does not quite have that amount of scholarship money. They have some. EDS at Union does not quite have, but, and then again, the local formation option, which I am committed to not making it second tier, is, I hope, is not going to be prohibitively costly. I don't know at this point, Brianne, for what amount we'll be able to do it, but I don't want economics to be a bar. And I do know in doing this, some of it is going to be a sacrifice. However, I don't want people financially drowning, because it's hard to financially drown and be an effective minister. Right? So I hear that, and other folks can jump in on the information I've offered.
Thank you.
I think a piece of this is that there's trade-offs in what is financially viable for any particular individual. And that's hard to answer in a blanket question, because generally speaking, it's less expensive to do local formation. except that if you can up and move, there are these programs with no tuition, except you have to move to California or DC. And there's a lot of stuff in between. So, and there's a lot of other extra pieces. So Melissa, who's very recently out of seminary, put her info if people want to talk through some of the specifics. It's been a while since I paid for seminary, so my info is out of date on mine.
Melissa was at Bexley Seabury, so that's, and you know, it has the remote option and residency options, and it's not far. So you've got possibilities. You have ecumenical seminary here, also possibilities.
And also, I just want to say that I worked full time while I went to seminary, and it took me extra time because I worked and I took seminary classes at night, and that's how I paid for my seminary education. It's as Susie has said, I mean, every solution has its trade-offs and drawbacks, but I think that, you know, talking to people and getting a sense of what options are, I mean, there are ways to do it, and I definitely would not let financial considerations stop you.
This is Carolyn Johnson. I'd like to say that my parish also helped when I was in the diaconate program. So they gathered money together through different programs there. And my priest also put in a lot. Plus, at the time I was going, the cathedral had scholarships that were available. So it is a sacrifice, but I'm just saying you can get some help.
And now, Carolyn, everybody wants to know what congregation sponsored you so they can move there.
St. David's in Southfield.
Thank you, Carolyn.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Anything else, friends?
Before everyone got on, and when you signed in, you may have noticed the weird little voice thing saying, "This meeting is being recorded," because this meeting has been recorded. And Anna, will you tell everyone again how people can find that later?
Yeah, it'll be up on our diocesan YouTube page. I'll also email it out to all the attendees.
And can you, for the hay of it, is it possible to put a link on that Happy COM page that has—
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Resources?
Yeah, I'll do that too.
Okay. All right. Anything else, friends? Andrea and Susie, thank you very, very much. Members of the Commission on Ministry, thank you very, very much. Anna, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Ellen and Joanne, thank you. Sister V is one of our chaplains for the Commission on Ministry, and she's on my staff. Sister V, would you pray us out, please?
The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Also with you.
Gracious God, we thank you for the many and varied gifts that you have given to us. We thank you for challenging us to think in new ways and to look to new horizons. Bless us in all the ways that we go forward, in all the ways that we seek your guidance throughout our lives. And we thank you also for loving us so much that you would not accomplish your will without us. Bless us to be so in tune with your heart that we do your will here on earth and so renew the world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
And if you have questions, Susie is the chair of the Commission on Ministry. Andrea is always up for answering a question or six. Canon Ellen Ekevag on my staff is the staff person for the Commission on Ministry. And all things about the emails, please ask Anna. And just thank you to all of you for caring I very, very much appreciate your care and your interest, and I look forward to seeing how your leadership and our ministry evolves together. So, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night. Thank you.
Yeah.